So welcome to the May Talking Stick specifically for ACE. So this month we did split up the demo grantees so that we could have some specific time to be able to chat with ACE grantees. And then for those of you who are also NYCP grantees, you're welcome to join us right after this on the NYCP Talking Stick for May. We'll go ahead and get ourselves disclaimed.
This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred.
All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about some budget pieces, some things for implementation, and some things kind of harkening back to the PD meeting and some upcoming events. So with us today, of course, we have your program officer, Bianca, here to answer your questions and share some great information with you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I received pretty much everyone's APR. There's a couple that I'm waiting on, but they will be reviewed very soon. I know everyone's anxious and worried about, what was submitted, but, you'll get some feedback really soon. But, since that's handled, we're going to spend a lot of today talking about the budget revisions because, that's top priority along with meeting those other requirements before we start implementation. I know a handful of grantees have started implementing, so hopefully we can kind of hear from some of those grantees as well too. I'm interested to see how, the first start of ACE has been going since this is a brand new project. So, you guys are the pioneers when it comes to ACE, and I'm looking forward to, all the great things that ACE is going to do. So we'll have a great slide and some questions to answer for you.
So yeah, with that, we're going to jump right into talking about your budgets, particularly because I know that is the hot topic and what most of you are really focused on working on right now. So to kick off, we're going to talk a little bit about direct services versus project costs. So Bianca and the TA team get lots of questions about what counts as direct service to students and what doesn't and needs to be included in those project costs. So once you start implementation, remember that direct service has to be a minimum of 80% of your budget, and project costs cannot exceed 20% of your budget. So it's really important to know what would actually be a direct service versus what cannot be counted as a direct service. So we'll kind of share a little bit regarding this list here, which are some of the common things that have come up as far as, can I count this as a direct service, or am I going to have to include it in project costs? So to kind of kick off, as we think about grant reporting, when you're doing your grant reporting, so when you're doing your APR report or you're working on a budget revision with those budget pieces, those can't be direct services. You're not working with students. Yes, that does help you to be able to provide services for students, but those do have to be included as project costs. They cannot be included as direct services. Project evaluation. So whether that's an internal evaluator, an external evaluator, no matter who's conducting that, your evaluation, if that's included in your project, because I know not all of you have that included, that doesn't get to count as direct services either. That will need to be part of your project costs. And then oversight of student activities. So if you or someone on your team is going out and they're checking on activities, they're checking in on how things are running, they're making sure that things are happening appropriately, students where they're supposed to be, classes are occurring, those are still project cost as well. Okay, direct services has to be actually doing activities with students. So the oversight of those would still need to be under that project cost piece. Also data collection. So if you're collecting the data that you need to do for reporting, if you're collecting student attendance, if you're collecting student grades, if you're getting all of that data together, whether it's for your annual reporting or for your internal processes, still project costs, not direct services, still project costs. The other one that's come up a lot is marketing. So if you're marketing the activities and you're getting the word out to the community and to the students and to the families about the great things going on in your program, totally an allowable activity, but it's project costs, not direct services. So that's all going to fall under those project costs as well. And then family activities is one that's come up a lot, particularly because, you know, this is something different than with your NYCP projects. If you had a previous grant, this grant solely serves students. So offering activities where the intended audience are adult family members is not an allowable direct service activity. So that doesn't mean that you can't work with families to help them select services for their students or participate in things, but those cannot be direct service activities as part of your project. And let's see, we have a question. What if the students were involved with the marketing as part of a job shadow or a learning activity? Bianca, do you want to take that one?
So, I mean, that is kind of confusing. I mean, what are they selecting to be a part of? Like, you know, everything that's funded through ACE needs to be selected by the student. So if they're selecting to be like a mentor or a job shadow, then whatever service provider that's providing that, you know, that cost should be associated with that service provider. You know, the students need to select to be a part of it. So, you know, if we're talking about like marketing, so the students know about the services versus maybe like marketing as a position, you know, if they are, you know, looking to be a marketer or I don't know, a graphic designer or something, and they're shadowing, then that can, you know, be an actual service that's selected. But I don't know if we're talking about the same concept.
So do you want me to add to that? This is Spencer.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, so because we have worked in creating some CTE pathways with some of our schools. And so marketing, I was thinking, and that has been something that's come up as part of a business pathway, is experience for students with marketing. And some kids have done that with yearbooks. But this could be another avenue. I mean, word of mouth is great. And a lot of times parents are, I guess, more open to hearing it from the students and getting excited about it if the students are excited about it. So time spent with the students in increasing, and I know that a lot of this will be done before if we're still in a planning year, before we're official. But as we go and we want to increase efforts with marketing to create more awareness, just wondering if that would be allowable as far as the direct services.
So in a planning period, we cannot have direct services. So any marketing that you're doing now, you know, shouldn't be considered a direct service, or, you know, if it's involving students, it's not something that they're, you know, selecting or the grant is paying for. You know, any marketing right now, maybe, you know, our surveying right now would be, you know, to get information for the grant and to hand out information for the grant. So, you know, in your scenario, I can see where one of the services provided could be, you know, like what is like an apprenticeship type of program, or, you know, a mentorship program where they sign up to, you know, be, you know, get into that field of marketing or advertising or something. But again, it would need to be selected as a service that's provided.
Correct. Yeah, and I was actually not talking about their planning period, but after
Okay.
our period. I mean, so in, you know, once we're in, you know, next year and years after, or the following years of the grant.
And then it looked like Ryan had his hand raised with possibly an associated question.
Yeah, so similar to what Spencer was mentioning, for next year, one of the goals that we have is doing work-related experiences. And we've already had a bunch of students mention to us about photography. And if they were to do a job shadow, like geocaching, like an area of a picture that we have from our elders, and then taking a picture for today of what it looks like, and having them create a calendar and being able to use that calendar as a marketing device is kind of where I was going, and tying into what Spencer's talking about. So those materials and items needed to create that experience, and then those calendars, if you would, being used as marketing. Is there a way that we can connect those two together as far as the cost?
I think it's still separate things. Like, I think, you know, one, you're marketing for a program, and one, you're teaching marketing. So if you're teaching marketing, regardless of what it's marketing, that cost would still just be associated with that service provider, you know, versus, you know, the marketing for the program needs to be administrative. So whatever supplies or printing materials that's needed for that, those students who wanted to participate in a job shadowing or mentoring program that's selected, you know, is completely allowable, as long as that cost is directly associated with that service provider. But, you know, what we're talking about as far as advertising and marketing that grantees are doing is, like, you know, we need to let, you know, families and students know what services we're offering. And that's what we're saying, that cost that's associated with that advertising of your program and services, or the service providers that you're offering, needs to be under that admin, you know, that limit of 20%. So is that clear, the difference? You know, if really, you know, a direct service needs to be something selected by the student. So if you have, you know, a marketing program that's selected by the student, then that cost just needs to be under that service provider, you know, versus, you know, the marketing that is needed for the program.
Great. So the last few here on this slide, kind of wrapping up this particular topic, there was assisting with service selection. So this is kind of going into that family piece as well. You might be assisting families, you might be assisting the students as far as understanding what the various service options are and how they work through whatever system you've set up, whether that's a paper form, whether that's an electronic portal, however you've got set up for them to pick their services. That's all part of the project cost. So service selection, if you remember in your project costs, it's split into 4 different categories. You have the category for direct administrative. You have the category that's for service selection and family feedback. The structural. And you have the category for other project costs, kind of that catch-all. And then you have a category for indirect costs. So that kind of will help you remember where any of that assisting with service selection goes, because you have a whole category for it as part of your project costs under that structural. And then the last one is—
So hold on real quick, Sarah. So like with assisting with service, I see John's question there. You know, there's some programs who want to hire people who go into the community to help families, assist them with making service selections and everything, which is completely fine, but that's still a part of that service selection method, you know, so it has to be in that 20%. So it'll be, you know, your structural costs that would account for that, you know, role or position or contract where, you know, there's actually someone who's helping with those families making the service selection. So that is not a direct service. That is all a part of the structural costs, just to be clear before we move on.
Can I ask a follow-up, please?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, you know, we're still recruiting, you know, this will be an ongoing thing, you know, but, you know, we try to communicate the information. We have the application, then we have the service selection form, and the parents will attempt to, you know, we explain when we, you know, I'm having our parent liaison help with some of the explanation of the selection form. but there's always the questions about, clarification on that. So if they reach out to a academic counselor who is basically providing services, that wouldn't count as a student service. That would have to be administrative. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. It's hard to break out that, having that brief conversation with a parent to answer questions about that. So, yeah. Okay.
And then the last category here is another one that we've gotten a lot of questions about. So if you are creating curriculum and or lesson plans, and I'm going to let Bianca kind of take away the explanation on curriculum and lesson plans with ACE funds.
Yeah, so, with ACE, we definitely cannot use the funds to build or create the capacity of any service provider. So we're not, using the funds to create a whole new service or curriculum or brand new anything that hasn't been done yet. And then as well with so creating that, can't be done with the funds. If there's like lesson plans that's needed, sorry, that's my 3-year-old. If there's lesson plans that's needed for the service providers, that cost should be associated with the service provider contract or the service provider agreement. Hold on, Josiah. Okay, go in your room, please, baby. And then, sorry. 3-year-olds don't like hearing no, I'm sorry.
We all work with children, so we're all on board.
Yeah, so and then if you have found a way, I'm sorry, he wants me to open a box that's not even for him. So so also another way that you can see things too is like if there's a way that, like you said before, if they're mentoring or they are in a position where they want to create curriculums and students are signing up to do that, then maybe it could be a direct service, but we're, actually spending time on that curriculum or lesson plan should already be a part of the service provider. So, or the service provider agreement and costs associated with it. But, that should be under that contract or for them, but we shouldn't, be using the funds to create or start anything brand new.
Okay, Bianca, this is Kelly.
Yes.
So I have a question about this. In my original budget, we had set up where we were going to hire 4 staff. We were going to have a counselor coordinator, and then we were hiring 3 teachers. Because we, as far as our project, is in 3 specific schools. Within that school, we have rural schools that do not have enough elective courses. We, as far as Choctaw Nation, we were going to be setting up these elective courses inside the 3 schools. It was recommended that we kind of look at moving, instead of hiring that extra staff, to move that down into a contract. I've met with my 3 schools, and so it's like, okay, we've broken it out. Here are my responsibilities as far as the grantee. Here's your responsibilities as far as the school system / service provider, but they're not really our service. It's more of an MOU, because this project is being housed in 3 schools to serve our Native American populations. So I'm a little bit confused there, because we're structuring this program, that elective course, so that we have control over that elective course, and we know what those students are going to be taught, because it's a college and career elective course. So I'm getting a little bit concerned about some of the money and some of the POs and the things that I've got going through, because if I just turn it over to someone else, then it's not gonna, the students aren't necessarily gonna get what we want inside that class.
So what you're saying is that, you basically wanted to purchase the supplies or curriculum for the service providers. Is that kind of?
That's what I'm saying is there's two distinct as far as responsibilities. And we're asking the school they're gonna function, they're gonna provide us with a teacher, they're gonna, the teacher, the classroom, the space. So there are things that they are doing, but on our side, we're saying, we want you to teach. This is what we want you to teach our Native American students because they don't already have it in the school. So they would have to create it already because they don't have a college and career elective course. That's why we are setting this up as an opportunity for our students to participate in because it's not already being offered. And in Oklahoma with the ICAP, the individualized career and academic plans that are set up in Oklahoma, that's a requirement for these students in schools to do. The schools are struggling to try to be able to provide all of these services to the students, let alone our Native American students. They're struggling to provide it to any of the students as far as to meet the criteria for Oklahoma.
So I'm confused at what your question is still.
Well,
like, is it hiring the teachers or is it paying for curriculum or?
No, it's paying for with our responsibility. It would be paying for the curriculum because I was under the understanding that I couldn't hire those teachers. I had to move those teachers into a contract. So I've now tried to revamp and move those teachers into a contract so we didn't hire them they're not our staff. But we're purchasing that and we're wanting to purchase that curriculum for that elective course.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I think your situation is a little bit different, but this is just talking about the creation and curriculum of the lesson plans. We know that like some of our suggestions for how to handle the budget may not fit every community, and if that's something unique where you're purchasing the stuff and then providing it to the service providers, that's something we can talk about and further explain and see how we can go about that. But what we're really getting at right here is just using the funds to create. So it doesn't seem like that's the issue you're getting at. It's just you want to basically get the supplies for the service providers because you have them as contracts versus personnel, which I understand. And that's probably justifiable, but more information or clarity would just be needed.
Okay.
And then I see Sandy has his hand up. He's had it up for a while, so we'll go to him and then we'll go to the chat box question from Tom. Take it away, Sandy.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I just had a question too. So with our services, one of our services is a summer program, a 6-week summer program working with the Boys and Girls Club. And a part of that each week is kind of focusing on a different topic. And what else we was going to incorporate into that was it's a curriculum called the Habitudes. It's suggested by the Nebraska Department of Education State Department. And so I guess with us wanting to incorporate that, would that have to be purchased by the Boys and Girls Club? And would that be part of their costs to implement that into the program? And then they would have to create the lesson plans, or how does that work?
So is it all in one? Like, so they're going to the 6-week program and receiving that, or what's the 6-week program at the Boys and Girls Club?
So the 6-week program is so each week has a different topic. So like 1 week is gonna focus on culture, and we'll have speakers and activities by the Boys and Girls Club. They're working with different community people, partners to provide that, but also along with that curriculum, it kind of teaches them like college and career readiness. So we're trying to implement that along with those topics. So it's like that curriculum is like separate. It's like through a different organization, but it's suggested by the state education department. So in order to implement that, they would have to purchase that, and they would have to decide like lesson plans, like this week, this is what the curriculum we're going to cover and things like that. And I couldn't be a part of that as a project coordinator, or I guess that's my question.
So it's confusing. So it's like, are you just using the Boys and Girls Club for the facility and you're providing the services? Because, yeah, like, why
So
is
that-
the Boys and Girls
we're-
Club included if you're creating a bi-week different program, I guess?
Oh, so like it's not us creating that. They're the ones that have that program that they're creating. So they have like that 6-week program that they're going to do it for the Boys and Girls Club. And each week is going to be a different topic. So they're going to be facilitating and doing all of that. But we were wanting to, not too
Like the college career readiness, like add a component to it.
add with that. Yeah. So with that curriculum, we wouldn't be able to purchase it and give that to them because that would be capacity building, right? Are you still confused?
So it sounds like, you just have another college and career readiness. I mean, it's already something that has, backed up evidence on it, or, are you trying to figure out the college and career readiness? Like if it's already something established, it can be utilized. I think there's 2 different directions now you can go with it. If you think that, the Boys and Girls Club can administer this additional component, then yeah, add that cost into their service provider agreement. If you think that they can't, then you need to make sure that you as the service provider adding that component, that still is selected as an additional service. So, they'll have a college and career readiness, thing to select. And then those kids who select that, then you can come in and provide that service, and that cost would be associated with your own costs. But as long as it's already established, that's fine. I think, adding a component is, you just don't want to spend the funds to like do the research and data to figure out and build a curriculum. You're not starting from ground zero with any of the services you are providing.
Okay, that kind of helps. I'll probably have to set up another meeting with you just to kind of get a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so then we had a question from Tom. Kind of a 2-parter. So the first being that can, the grantee be one of the service providers, and would that fall under the 80%? So yes, you can be one of the service providers, but you must have at least one other non-grantee service provider. But all of that still has to fall under that 80%. So direct services are going to be direct services, whether they're from you or from a external provider. And same thing with project costs. So it's more about what you're doing rather than who is doing it. The second part though, you have a driver's ed instructor on staff and would like to offer that as an option to students. So you can definitely offer driver's ed as a menu option that students could select. But ideally, and we'll talk about this a bit more on the next slide, because you're going to be using an instructor that you may have salaried, then you would probably want to then write a contract with yourself for that particular service option. All right, other questions on direct services versus project costs? Okay, well then we will hop into the next category. But if you think of more questions on this, you're welcome to still jump in with them. The next thing we're going to be talking about, we're really going to go kind of piece by piece through the different parts of the budget. So talking about personnel expenses. So as we think about personnel expenses, most of you have a project director, many of you have project coordinators and other folks like that. You may have evaluators. Most of those leadership roles are going to have to fit under that 20% because they are not providing direct services to students. They're not actually engaging and delivering an activity with kids. They're doing things to support that work, but they themselves are not. Now, I know some of you have looked at job sharing so that maybe their project director 50% of the time and 50% of the time they are delivering direct services. So that kind of gets into salaries and contracts. So we've talked about this before, and I'll let Bianca go into more detail again about contracting with yourself, but remembering that when we have salaried staff doing direct services, all those direct services are paid out on a per student cost basis. So if we have somebody who is delivering services and they're making $50,000 a year salaried, and they're supposed to deliver a service to 50 kids at $1,000, and that's how we came up with that salary, that's not taking into account in that per student cost their fringe benefits. It's not taking into account any of their supplies that they might need for that activity. And it's not taking into account that if they don't get 50 kids, what if they only get 40 kids? You can only pay out $40,000. Where are you going to get the other $10,000 of their salary? So it's not only protecting that staff person, but it's protecting you as an organization, that you don't get to the end of the year and have a budget shortfall between what you can allowably pay with your ACE funds and what you've promised legally to folks because they're salaried personnel. So we don't want you at the end of the year looking for that magic bucket of gold at the end of the rainbow trying to make up budget shortfalls. Bianca, do you want to talk any more about kind of the contracting with yourself piece?
Yeah, there's a couple things on this page. I know this is like the hot topic, honestly, when it comes to the budget. You know, ultimately, I understand and get why you want to include people as personnel in your budget, you know, which is allowable, but still needs to be justified. And you definitely need to have a plan in place too, just for like the same thing Sarah was saying, like if less kids select that service, then now, you know, how are you going to pay for the remainder salary that you promised this person? Or, you know, I know some grantees may propose to like hire people that can provide more than one service that's justifying like that, you know, this salary is definitely going to be met because they're offering, you know, several services, or maybe the position got moved to a part-time position or an hourly based position, you know, so there's certain ways that make sense for hiring personnel, but you also need to have that data as well too, you know. Some of the grantees who already done evaluations and surveys of the families may see that like 100 out of, you know, 150 kids said they really want this service. So maybe that makes sense why you have a full-time person hired for that position, you know, but we don't want to just say we need, you know, this and that, and we have no real proof when it comes to what the students are going to select, you know, especially when, you know, you might think that having like 3 counselors is needed, but then you might have something great like at the Boys and Girls Club and all the kids end up choosing the Boys and Girls Club and no one wants the counseling, you know, and this could happen. And now, you know, we have these counselors paid and no one's selecting them, and we can't pay them from the grant because, you know, we're accountable for every single dollar that's going out and making sure that it's for direct services. So, you know, if you do move towards having personnel or a contract, you still need to have a service provider agreement with yourself. If you are a service provider, you need to have a service provider agreement. And that's what goes to having a contract with yourself, you know, in the service provider agreement that you're ensuring and you're signing and saying that, you know, every hour that this person is working, that they're working as a direct service for students. You know, you're saying that in this service provider agreement that you're going to meet this goal with this service that you're providing. You know, you have to be accountable for reaching those goals, just like all the other service providers that you have selected for this project. So you do need to have a contract and agreement in place with yourself. And then, you know, we use the term contract as well too. And when I'm saying contract, that's usually talking about like more financial terms. So, you know, you could definitely hire independent contractors, and they would be accountable for, their fringe benefits and the supplies that's needed and the travel that's needed and everything else that's needed. And that one contract, they can be paid $100,000 a year, and that includes their $70,000 salary, $10,000 for health and benefits, and where am I at? 20,000 for supplies. Sorry, not the best math person, but, and you can wrap that all up in one contract and be like, okay, hey, you're an independent contractor. You're responsible for, getting the supplies. You're responsible for traveling and meeting with the students or whatever the case may be. So that is having contract staff if you're having an independent contract. Also, you can have a whole complete contract with your entity. So let's say you're a tribal organization already, or just the tribe, if you are having salaried person paid by your entity, you can still be contract to say that, part of that salaried person or these people, are being paid to deliver this portion of the contract, but that's having a contract, with that entity yourself. In that entity, maybe, let's say you have two different people giving two different services. That contract will include, all of the supplies for those two service providers, plus that salary and fringe benefits and everything that is paid out from ACE, to you. So we know that, not one way fits every single one of your projects. So, please, if there are any questions or concerns, or maybe you understand it, but your financial people might not understand it, or even tribal administrators or whoever may, prevent how you know that this project can work under this ACE structure. Please let us know, because, if we need to explain it a little more or put something in writing, we know this is, very different than probably any other grants that any other place has. So we know, it's not familiar and it is a little confusing. So if you do need more explanation or other people need to hear it besides you, please let us know so we can help get to that. But we do know there's many different ways to get to the same, structure we're looking at. And sometimes it's going to take, a different way of doing things, or some more justification, or just proof that, this is going to equal the result that we're looking for. So is there questions related? I see a couple that popped up while I was talking.
So the first one being, can a service provider offer more than one service? So easy answer there, yes. You can have a service provider that's offering multiple services. That's completely fine. The next one, can we pay salary and fringe for a staff person who is fully providing student services?
It is possible with justification, like I was saying, if you are going in the route of hiring personnel with fringe benefits, that's where we're looking to make sure that you're not hiring people and promising them 5 years and a full-time job regardless. We want to know that you're telling these people that your salary is dependent on the students who's selecting that service. So if you're moving into a part-time position or hourly position, if you have evidence that shows, that 70% or more, a lot of students are going to be selecting this service, and it will equal a full-time position, but you still have to be responsible for every single hour, that person is clocked in, that it is a direct service, that if you're hiring, let's say, like a language teacher, and their hours are, after school, so it would be like from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. every day, it wouldn't be any of the hours that's not a direct service. So, you have to be very, very, very detailed, and that tracking of time and making sure, you know, that the hours that we are paying from the grant, that it is provided as a direct service. So yes, it is possible to hire positions under this grant, but, you know, we have to make sure, you know, we're being very smart with those hires.
Well, and the next question is kind of along the same lines. They're saying if they're an employee who's providing a service, they do a contract agreement. But then because it's a contract agreement, they couldn't pay benefits, correct?
Hmm.
So if they have a staff.
So when,
yeah, go ahead.
so like, let me explain it as, like, let's think of you as like the Boys and Girls Club, right? So like, let's say all of you guys are the Boys and Girls Club, and I'm coming to you with this ACE project, and I'm saying, you know, I want you guys to deliver, you know, this service. So, you know, we have a contract for you to you know, do the service for 100 kids, you know, twice a week, right? So that contract with Boys and Girls Club would need to include the staff that is needed, you know, like for the service that's being provided, the supplies that's needed. So you're really just writing out this whole contract that includes everything that's needed to provide this service that you're requesting. So the same thing that you're doing to the Boys and Girls Club, you need to do with yourself, because, you know, if you have, like, let's say, you know, a lot of you guys already have employees that, you know, will be great at providing the service, right? So they're already hired. Maybe they're an employee and do, you know, part-time, you know, for another grant or whatever the case may be, you know. And if you want to take them and they're an employee under your grant or your tribe, and you want them to provide that service, so you know, they'll still be paid by your entity. You know, you're paying the salary and fringe, but you're getting that payment back from the grant. So it's almost like, you know, in a way, reimbursement. Like, so if, you know, someone is doing, you know, works for you right now, and maybe they're like the language specialist for your tribe, and now you want, you know, them to deliver language classes for ACE. So, you know, maybe their salary increased from ACE, or they lost half of their service that they were doing before. So now you're paying, you know, for that additional service from the grant, but they're still your employee, you know. Their whole paycheck's probably not dependent on, you know, this grant if they've already been hired or paid, you know, by this grant. That makes sense.
Well, then the next one, so if you have one provider who's offering multiple services, does each service need a separate contract service provider agreement? So I think that's going to vary based on what they're offering. So think about what's in that service provider agreement. You know, you're talking about when they're offering the service and how often, and how you're going to measure that the kids are getting the intended outcome from it. So if they're offering maybe two similar services that are for the same duration and have a lot of those things in common, it would be pretty easy to pop those both into the same contract. But I know in your early example, like one was an after school program and one was a summer program. In those instances, those are going to be fairly different because they're going to be for different time spans. It might be for definitely usually different durations and number of goals. So at that point, it's typically going to be easier to go ahead and do a separate contract or service provider agreement, because so much of the information is going to be different. But that's really just kind of up to you as you're figuring out the contracts for the various people and what services they're going to be providing. The next one, so if a staff person is providing all student services, so 100% of their time is on direct service, can they bill planning time for the student services as part of their compensation?
So a staff person is providing, I mean, I definitely think that there should be some planning time associated with personnel direct services. what we don't want to do is like, say you're in a planning period right now and you're going to hire like language teachers. So you have them up for 6 months for planning time. But, if like how teachers now, when they're hired, they have like asynchronous days, or every other Friday, they have, a day that's considered planning time to prepare. I definitely can see, something written out like that, but it shouldn't be like idle time. Like we're just waiting until, we get students or something. It should be a part of that agreement as well. That, maybe you have like an hour every week or something that is for planning, but that should be very clear and in that service provider agreement.
And so the follow-up was, so we should designate a standard amount of planning time weekly.
If that's something that you're paying for personnel, yeah, you definitely should have something, that makes sense. Like we just don't want, like how some jobs are, you're just waiting for a call to start working or something. And no, I get teachers need, time before to prep and things like that. So, let's make it make sense and not just like calculate, everything as planning, but if you can, when you hiring people, like, yeah, you get, every Friday or something you'll have, to plan, then yeah, that makes sense to me. But it should definitely be something agreed on and planned out.
And the next one is, how about interdepartmental partnerships? Should these be contracts or can they be MOUs?
So it just depends. Like we have to have service provider agreement. So whoever is your service provider, that's what we're, making sure that you have, that you're getting that information that's needed. So, we're not requiring any partnerships or MOUs. We're requiring, multiple service providers. So, you can have MOUs if there's more than one, agency that's providing the service. But again, that service provider agreement should list that, this is inclusive of maybe both departments or two agencies, we're that's, I guess that's more internal.
And then the next one actually leads nicely into another area of budget, which is our supply area. So the question was, how can they set up if they're doing educational supplies to students as a service? So would they have to set up, per se, a contract where someone is actually distributing those, or if it's just a matter of there's a pack of supplies that you can sign up for as a service and get, can that just be a line item under supplies?
Yeah, so if you are providing services to students, that would be a service that the grantee is providing. So that portion should definitely still be a part of a service provider agreement, that you're tracking the supplies, that it's fair, that you're, not buying expensive stuff, or, like you're just making sure that there's still an agreement in place for that. But yeah, that would definitely be a supplies and something that students still would need to check for. So, if you wanted to provide laptops, out of all the options, that would be included with, do you want to go to the Boys and Girls Club? Do you want a laptop? Do you want language classes? Those are your 4 options that needs to be on a list, and you have to let them know if, there you can afford all 4, or if you can afford three of them, per student. Each student would have to have the same amount or cost associated for the per student cost. So, that supplies amount would still need to be selected and portioned into that per student cost.
Well, and the associated question with that was, then any processing time in order to fulfill those supplies could be direct services.
Any supply procurement includes. I mean, no. Processing time for the supply. I know, I don't know, honestly. I can ask the attorneys. I mean, it seems like, I mean, like how much time, I guess, is this? Yeah, it's a good question for the attorneys. I don't know. I can't give you a straight answer right now. I don't know if you want to weigh in on that one, Sarah, or.
Yeah.
what's-
We'll definitely check on that. Typically, it shouldn't be taking a significant amount of time to hopefully place an order for these supplies. If that's something that is taking a significant amount of time, that's something to look at. But yeah, I'm going to put that on the follow-up list. So we'll get back to you on that one. All right. So then the other piece of that is then those supplies would be under direct services, correct? So yes, yeah, because that's
Yes.
what you're actually giving to the kid. That's a direct service. Okay. Question about, can you provide a laptop for contracted staff?
If they need a laptop for contract, that should all be included in their contract. So you shouldn't have any supplies outside of their contract. So, if you're hiring even an independent contractor in their contract, that cost for that independent contractor could include a laptop, but no, we're not able to, definitely not under direct services. If you need any supplies for like admin costs, if you have like a new admin assistant that maybe is helping do reports and things like that, that should be billed under, that 20%. So definitely, make sure that if it is for, service providers, that's, a part of the service provider or in that 20% portion that you can use it for. But if it's for students, then it definitely would be a direct service.
And then I see.
Can I ask a follow-up? Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've moved some of our academic counselors to contract positions. So I'm kind of treating them like an employee, where I am providing them a laptop and I am providing them a phone, because I didn't put that in the contract with them. I mean, I guess I could have, but I didn't. So I was providing those tools for them, and they will be working out of our resource centers at our branch offices in Chicago and Houston and here. So if we choose to do that and we pay that through our administrative side, that's okay, right?
Yeah, but it almost seems like it's taken away from your admin by doing that, because it would have been fine if it was in the contract under direct service. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I've only done one so far, but I could change the others to that they would have to provide their own tools, but we still would be asking them to provide services at a location. So
yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, it kind of just, each scenario is a little different, but
I could see how that could save us money on the administrative side if it's all part of the contract. If you're contracting somebody to do student services and you can pay for it all through the student service side, that saves you money on the administrative side.
yeah.
Yeah, I see that. Okay.
All right. And then Sandy, you're next.
So this kind of comes back to the difference between project cost and direct service cost. So are we allowed to help the service provider plan for the services that they're going to provide? So like, for example, the after school program that the Boys and Girls Club are going to be doing, is it okay for us to be involved to say, this is, to help plan like what each week is going to cover and things like that, or what activities they're going to do, or is that not allowable?
Can you repeat your first part of the question?
So, like, when it comes to like spending your time and how do you, I guess, where that cost is going to come from, are we able to sit and plan with the Boys and Girls Club? Like, for example, for the after school program, would it be okay to sit with, okay, week 1 is going to cover this and week 2 is going to do this. This is what activities we're doing, what week 1 activities in week 2, or do we leave that all up to the Boys and Girls Club and they bring that to us, or can we be a part of that planning? And if we are, is there a certain...
So yeah, is your question like about billing that time, or is just because I think, yeah, you definitely can be a part of it. That comes down to your service provider agreement with that service, how much say or how prescriptive you are in that service provider agreement. That's what's going to be laid out. If you want them to do X, Y, and Z in week 1, that can all be a part of that agreement that you provide as, the grantee. But, if it's coming about like, billing for it or working with them, I definitely think that would be a part of that 20%. If it's, the time spent working with the service provider to get that contract or get that service, aligned would be more the structural part of ACE, if that answers your question.
Okay, yeah, that does. Thank you.
All right, the next question is, they have a service provider and the service provider has quoted a rate that for 1 to 35 kids, it's this fee. So whether they have 10 kids or whether they have 35, they still charge the same flat rate. So that will impact their cost per student. How could they best put that into their service provider agreement?
In your agreement, I think you will state like the price will be dependent on, if you have 35 kids or more. And then for your budget, if you need to change or move your budget around because more kids enrolled or less kids enrolled than expected, then you'll just, submit a new budget. But in your service provider agreement, the exact same thing that you stated should be noted, that the price would be less if there's more students that enroll versus if there's less students that enroll.
All right. So we don't have any other specific questions. So I'm going to hop over to travel expenses. So one thing, just in case it has kind of been lost in the shuffle for everybody, the project director meeting, because it was virtual this year, that is the only project director meeting that we'll have this grant year. It cost you nothing to attend. None of you had to fly anywhere or get a hotel. If you chose to, that was your decision. If you turned the project director meeting into a vacay, good on you, but it was not a grant expense. So all of those project director meeting funds that you had allocated in your original budget, you can go ahead and move those into another category. Make sure to denote that as you're doing your budget revisions where you're moving those travel funds. And then next year, you'll again put those funds back into project director meeting, as we believe will be in person. The one that does come up is other conferences. So you have to remember when we start talking about other conferences that really the ACE project does not allow for training and professional development. And this goes back to that requirement around not doing capacity building activities. So really the only time that a training or anything like that would be an allowable expense is if it was it would have to go under your project costs, and it would have to be something that's building up the abilities of your staff to do things under project costs. So that's going to be pretty limited as to what that, could entail. Those are definitely expenses that I would get put together and submit to Bianca for approval. If it's a professional development or training expense, I would not just assume that that's going to be okay. You want to definitely run those by, because the majority of those are not going to be allowable expenses because of the capacity building piece. The other one that comes up a lot is mileage. So remember that if it's mileage for your service providers, that should all be in that service provider agreement. That should be looped in. We can't do reimbursement for mileage for our service providers. That needs, you'll need to think about kind of an average amount and make sure that that's built into their contract. Now, mileage for your leadership staff, if they're going out and supervising activities or they're going out and holding family meetings to get people signed up, that would be allowable, but under that project cost, it would have to fit under your 20%. And then finally, student transportation to activities. Some of you are offering that as a service menu option. So maybe you're offering, you know, after school transportation or weekend transportation. It's going to depend on what that is. If it's a standalone menu option or whether it's part of one of the existing services that you're offering. But that is something that you could offer as a service menu option. Questions on travel and travel expenses? All right, and we do
I have
have
a question,
yeah.
and I'll just ask it since there's a quiet spot.
Yeah.
You mentioned staff going to a home, not being, that would be fall under project cost, mileage, right?
Yes.
Even if they were going to tutor a student or a group of students at a location other than the school.
Yeah, so in that instance, that would be looped into that per student cost for that activity.
Okay. So even if they're an employee, I mean, would it be better for us?
So
to-
if you do have employees who are service providers, like that's the type of justification that we need when that price is included under like that 80%, the direct service, that, you know, this is for let's say, you know, the tutor A under personnel to, you know, like just be very, very, very detailed about how that is a part of the direct service. And like Sarah was saying, that on that first page of your sheet, all that cost should still be associated for that per student cost. So, you know, their supplies, the transportation, the salary, and everything that it takes for that service should equal that per, you know, or be divided by all the students and then equal that per student cost. So, you know, just make sure that it's all connected.
Okay, so under our grant that we submitted, we have a couple of positions for what we've called student success coaches. And so because we're, like a lot of people on reservation, we're very remote, and connectivity via internet is extremely limited. So if there was a location where students were meeting for after school tutoring or in the evening, for our student success coach to travel to that location to hold that tutoring session, that mileage would not be, that would fall under project, or would that fall under direct services?
That would still be direct service.
Okay.
That because they're providing the service to remote areas, right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we had two chat box questions. The first being, can they do the same for their personnel, reallocate the balance? So yeah, if you have funds that have not been expended in personnel because someone was hired later in the year, and you're working on your budget revision currently, then yes, definitely move those funds that you know have not been expended and won't be expended on that position into other areas that you can use them within the scope of your project by the end of the grant year, and just make sure and put that explanation into your budget revision. And then the question about, so a little confused about student transportation versus with it being travel expense versus direct service. Great question. It can be both. So as you look down your budget, you have your various budget categories where it goes personnel, fringe, travel, supplies, contracts, and it goes down with those categories. And then as you go from left to right, the project cost versus direct services. So student transportation can be under that travel expense and be a direct service at the same time. And I hope that makes sense, Katie. If it doesn't, just let me know in the chat box. Is there a certain form or format to use for budget revisions, and who do we submit those to? There is a certain form, and you submit those directly to Bianca via email. I will actually pop that form into the box for anybody that needs it as well. Correct, Katie, it wouldn't pull from the 20% then. Yeah. All right. I'm going to pop to our next category. We are a few minutes over, but I do want to make sure we get through each of the categories and get all of your questions answered. So we will go through the last bits, and if you're able to stay with us, great. If not, it is being recorded as well. So this is your other category. So with your other category, sometimes there's a myriad of interesting things that end up here, sometimes because they should be, sometimes they actually need to get moved into some other places. One of the things that comes up are stipends to elders. So this is going to vary a lot depending upon what are you giving them a stipend for? Are you giving them a stipend to partake in planning during your planning year? Are you giving them a stipend because you'd like for them to provide some instruction as part of one of the services that you're offering? So it really goes back to not necessarily that it's a stipend to an elder, but what are they doing? So are they providing a direct service, or are they doing something that would be considered a project cost? We also have one that's come up a good bit, reimbursements to families for application fees. So maybe one of your services is that you'll pay for a student to take the ACT test, or you'll pay their application fees for them to apply to 3 colleges, or whatever the case, whatever your parameters may be. You cannot provide reimbursements to families. So, you know, I know with some programs it could be they show you that they've completed the application and that they've submitted their payment, and then you're able to reimburse them. That's not how it can work with the ACE program. So you would need to think about what's the easiest way for this to work for you. Would it be easiest for you to actually sign the child up for the ACT test or the SAT test or whatever test you're paying for them to take? And that way you're making the direct payment to the company. If it's fees for college applications, maybe they turn in their, you know, proof of application and you cut a check directly to the university and they can then mail that check in. But just think about, you know, what's a way that you can do this where you're making direct payment to the organization, not reimbursing the family. And then the last one gets a little hairier. Office rental and vehicle rental or purchase. So if you're needing to rent or lease office space, particularly if that was not in your original grant proposal, or if you're needing to rent or purchase a vehicle and that was not, may have been in your original proposal, may not have been, those are definitely ones to reach out to Bianca. Don't guess. Don't just do it and ask for forgiveness later. This is definitely not one of those situations. This is not an extra pack of notebook paper. It's an entire vehicle or office. Ask, always ask in advance. And I'm gonna let Bianca give her 2 cents on this as well.
Yeah, you know, certain projects, we definitely understand the need for both rentals, but you know, where you're putting that on the budget needs to be like, you know, we need information why it's there. And then, you know, it's very, very rarely that we allow purchases of vehicles for grants, especially since the grant is only for a couple of years. And it holds federal interest where now you would have to use that vehicle for another federal grant and so on. And there's just a lot to do with it. So, you know, in best case scenario are, you know, definitely try to rent before thinking about purchasing anything, especially over anything over $5,000, because it does come with that federal interest. And yeah, it still is very dependent on your structure of your grant. I can't say, this is allowable for everyone because it's definitely not. It's very dependent on your project and your project's need.
All right. Couple of other questions. So if you're offering a college support program, can ACT prep fees be part of the service they account for in their costs? So if I'm understanding you right, Clarence, they would sign up, their service that they're signing up for would be a college support program. And part of what would be included in that per student cost would be an ACT prep package, whether that's a book or a online course or whatever. So that should be fine as long as it's accounted for within that per student cost when you write out that service provider agreement, because an ACT prep activity would make sense for college support menu selection. But if I'm not understanding what you're talking about, feel free to put more details in or unmute and clarify on that one.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how we're talking in other expenses. There may be fees like that we're also paying for. But if it is like a college program, then if it's just part of their cost that they, charge, I guess, as part of their per student cost, I guess then it doesn't need to be in this section, I guess, in the other section.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Ideally, we want to keep, honestly, as much stuff out of the other section as possible, because most things really and truly do fit in one of the actual categories. But yeah, no, you're exactly right, Clarence. Next one, what about PPE for students if we choose to conduct programming in person? So if you're moving to in-person programming and you want to, I'm guessing, buy things like masks and things for the students, would this be a supply cost assigned into the service provider agreement or an other expense that the grantee could provide for all youth that sign up for services?
If you find a way where you can have students select that they want this, protection, then yeah, you can have it as something, listed. But if you would like it to just be within the service providers or at the, facilities that the service providers are at, I think that makes sense to have it in that service provider agreement, extra funding for PPE. So, it's, if you can have it, selected as, something that they want and they can come pick it up and bring it wherever, then yeah, you can include it itemized. But if you want to give it to the service providers or, yourself, you definitely would want to include it in that agreement or with your own agreement.
Let's see, would it be possible for grantees to share what types of services they're offering? I think this would help other grantees grasp an idea of what additional services they can offer. Yes, absolutely. Two things on that. One, that is our hope with the Padlet. We have a whole discussion category there where we have encouraged folks to share as they're determining what services they're going to be offering, so that we can have that grantee to grantee sharing. We'll also be talking about that more in June. So we did talk about it a little bit earlier in the year, but honestly, it was a little early for most people. Everybody was so early into their planning phase that a lot of folks were still in the, I'm going to do some great things. I'm going to get back to you on my exact services really soon. So we'll be talking about that more in June, but I'll also give you the link again to the Padlet. We would love if everybody would share as they're figuring out what services they're going to offer, what that menu is going to look like for you, because it really is helpful to share grantee to grantee. All right.
I definitely think today has been super helpful for a lot of grantees. I think, if we can do next talking stick session separate as well, how does everyone feel about that? Just so I don't have to be confused about what I'm talking about and we can just be, strictly on ACE, probably at least until the planning period's over, maybe just so, NYCP don't know anything about planning period and all these budget information. So, maybe for the next couple of months, we can have it, ACE specific. So we can, help all the new directors and make it 2 hours, right? Yeah, definitely need some more time. Because I think, hearing from you guys, I want to hear from the grantees that started already. And I know I'm super busy. I don't know if you guys seen my email, but I've been paneling for another competition, and that's been taking, overtime and weekends and stuff. So this weekend, next week, I have been a little busy with that. So yeah, I definitely think next week, next month when we do the talking stick again, that we can, extend it and have it ACE specific and, really just dive in, because this has been super helpful. I know I have a couple of questions I'm going back to get answers from, because again, I don't know all the answers. I'm trying to make it work for, all the communities and still fit in this ACE structure. So please, work with me.
Well, and then Mary gave us a great lead into our last snippet, which is the 4 things that beyond your budget revision. I know that's what our primary hot topic is, but I do like to just kind of pop in that final reminder that if you're headed toward implementation, as some of you are, I know some of you are going to start implementation this summer or when the school year starts, that there are 4 things that you do need to submit and get approved by Bianca prior to starting your implementation. So that's a description of your service selection process, a description of your parent involvement and feedback process, a sample written agreement, as well as a list of everybody that you've got service provider agreements with, including yourself, and a description of the process that's going to be used to choose students if the demand for services exceeds your available capacity. So the question that came in the chat box was about implementation. So they're going to be asking to start implementation 2 months before originally projected. So I'm thinking that would mean August 1st. They'd like to start with the beginning of the school year. Would they just adjust the first year budget to include those services not originally in the budget? Or could they use some of the amounts budgeted in the first implementation year? So you can't touch those year 2 funds.
Yeah.
Those don't exist until October 1st.
Right. So that is, you definitely can. We're flexible on when you're ready to start implementation. If you, wanted to extend it till October 1st or start earlier, all I would need is that explanation written on letterhead and signed by the certifying official, so we can have it on file and that I can just make up a date and change it. So please, send that forward if you want to start earlier or move later. But all the funding for this year 1 has already been provided to you. So you do have to be mindful on how you will be able to implement with the remainder of your planning period funds, or, if it's a little bit easier if you, want to start later than planned because you received your planning year funds and some of your implementation. But, whatever we awarded you on your GAN, I believe you guys received it October 1, maybe a day before. But when you were awarded for this grant, you only received the amount for year 1's funding, and that's all we can give you until October 1 again. So, you have to make it work with that year. So we cannot advance you any of year 2's funds. So, if you are able to implement with, some of the funding, maybe there's something that can be provided, by all means, definitely. I'm supporting that, but if you do need to wait to implement and get things together due to financial reasons, I understand that as well.
All right. So, and then John, I did see your suggestion on FAQ on contracting and external providers. So Bianca and I will chat about the feasibility and allowability of that. So we'll get you some feedback on that too. So last couple of pieces, but remember, if you have any questions right now that are still lingering, make sure and pop those in. We want to make sure and get all your questions answered. Just a quick reminder, because I've gotten a couple of emails about it. If you attended the project director meeting or didn't attend the project director meeting, those recordings are still available for the next year. So if you were trying to access something or you were wanting a colleague to watch something, all of those recordings of those sessions are up for the next year, including the keynotes. So all available on demand back on the conference website. Just a reminder of that Padlet. That's where I was saying you can share with us those options of things that you have there. And I'm gonna pop that link right here in the chat box right quick for you, in case you don't have it at the ready. And you'll see there's a whole little topic talking about service. And then I had a request for the link for the project director meeting recordings. I'll pop that in. I'm gonna have to pull it up, so it'll be just 1 second, but I'll grab it for you. Just a couple of last reminders. If you've been tuning into the distance learning series, or if you want to catch the tail end, we do have our final 2 sessions coming up. The next one is next Tuesday, talking about ways to increase student engagement in the virtual learning environment. And then on June 1st, we'll have our virtual share fair. If you'd like to be featured in the virtual share fair, if you're doing anything cool or have been doing anything cool online, please let me know. We always love to feature fabulous grantees. And then also coming up this month, we have our OIE office hours. That's going to be both on May and June 27th from 1 to 2 Eastern. And then we also, you probably got the calendar reminders for the logic model and data-driven decision-making series. So that's going to be 3 Tuesdays in a row in June. The first 2 will be talking about logic models, and the last one will be on data-driven decision-making. That is open to your whole team, so feel free to invite anyone from your team that it would be helpful to have included in those discussions. And then our next talking stick will be June 10th. Now, it says 3 because that's our normal meeting time when we do our group meeting. But since we're going to be splitting out as the ACE crew again next month, remember that puts us at 2. So I'll update your calendar invites later this afternoon. But just keep in mind that when we split up, we take the earlier time. So we'll be at 2 Eastern. So as we wrap today, like I said, let me know if you have other questions. I'm going to pop the link and that form into the chat box. While I'm doing that, I need you to do one favor for me. So since we have not had a ton of people going and completing the feedback surveys in SurveyMonkey, we have moved it conveniently into Zoom. So you'll notice that our normal 2-question feedback survey has a couple more questions, so you don't even have to go to SurveyMonkey. So if you will humor me and complete our very quick feedback poll this week, while you're doing that, I'll pop those files and links in. And you'll see it's super short, shouldn't take but a couple, maybe a minute and a half, I think. I think you can do it that quickly. And then because we're doing it in Zoom, we don't have the option to be able to do a short answer. So we still love those short answer pieces. I think that's super great information we were getting from that. So if you do have some short answer information, and by that I mean any suggestions, questions, thoughts, you can still feel free to provide that short answer information in the chat box. You can even private message me if you don't want it to be a public private or public comment, not public private.
Sarah, I don't know if I'm just blocked from doing it, but I kind of went through the end of event poll and it won't let me submit. I've selected an answer for every one of them.
Once you hit an answer for everyone, you have
It's saved automatic.
You don't have to press any button. It's just that easy.
Perfect.
Let's see. Making sure I'm putting the right form here. Okay.
Yeah, very helpful today. Thank you.
Thank you. And then as we're wrapping up, the last thing I'll put on the screen is I'm popping in that link there for you to get to the PD things is just a reminder of our contact info. If you're like me, you get off the webinars and then in about an hour or 2, it all percolates down into your brain and then you have a bajillion questions. That is a-okay. Just send them on over. You can send them directly to Bianca as well as to the TA team. So you've got both of our email addresses there. and we'll get back to you with that information, as well as the couple that we needed to check on too. So I'm gonna stop our share so I can grab that link that I need for you. And I know a couple of you are still finishing up that feedback survey.
And one more thing too, I know there's a auto reply on my email right now because it's super busy. But if you guys are waiting for me, like anything urgent, if you're trying to implement and you're submitting something, please put urgent in the subject line and send it to me. I'll definitely look at it and I'll get to it. It's just busy right now, but I don't want you guys waiting on me and this paneling to be done to, you know, start implementing or, you know, put any fires out. You guys are still my first priority, but yeah, it's just a lot of emails coming in like every day about different stuff that's not even ACE related. So please put urgent. You can put the importance thing on. I will get back to you as soon as possible.
And I put over in the chat box that link if you're looking for the recordings from the PD meeting. The question about today's recording, I will see if it will process by the end of today. It all depends on how the technology wants to participate with me. It will probably be tomorrow before the recording is up. But I'll send everybody a notification when it's up because I know a lot of you may be going back and reviewing some of those allowable expenses and things. So I'll send out a notification, but I don't want to promise today because I just never know if it's going to cooperate. It'll likely be tomorrow morning, but fingers crossed. All right. Well, if you don't have any other questions, then we will see you next time. If you're an NYCP grantee as well, that one is still going on. So you're welcome to hop over and catch the tail end of that talking stick. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.